example of this. Okay, yeah. Right, just to continue. So here in the graph, you can see an example of this leaky pipeline in the economics profession. You can see even from the beginning, among students majoring in economics, women are already in the minority. And also as this academic rank goes up to PhDs, assistant professors, and eventually full professors, the share of women goes lower and lower. So this leaky pipeline is concerning because it implies that women are missing in highly skilled, highly paid professions, and especially in high-ranking positions. And that further implies a gender pay gap, as well as potential misallocation of talent across sectors. So then the question is, why do women leave male-dominated settings even though they chose the fields in the beginning? There are many potential reasons of that, but this paper focuses on one specific factor, and that is women's underrepresentation itself, or put differently, women's minority status. And to be clear, I will not focus on the whole pipeline, but rather focus on a very early stage and in a specific setting, that is the undergraduate level economics. So that we are on the same page, to make it very clear what I do in this paper, I essentially ask the following question. Can women's minority status drive them out of male-dominated fields, and especially in economics? And if that's the case, what are the potential underlying mechanisms? To answer the question, I conduct a field experiment in an introductory economics course at a Swiss university. The course is overall male-dominated, as it's typical in economics, and most of the students take the course in the first semester at college, meaning that they are in a new environment and with a potential demand for new peers. And the key intervention of the experiment is to randomly assign students into small study groups, which vary in the group gender composition. And then I utilize this exogenous variation to study the impact of minority status on women or on men. To be very specific, I compared the minority women who experience minority status in their study groups to other women who do not experience the minority status. As a preview of the results, I find that women experiencing minority status become 10 percentage points more likely to voluntarily drop the course. But I do not find a significant effect of the minority status in the study group on men's dropout behavior. Then I continue by asking why is that? Like why women in the minority status are more likely to drop out? And I focus on two potential mechanisms. The first is about the students' expectations about future educational outcomes. And I find the minority women, those who experience the minority status, they have significantly lower expectations about their future academic achievement, meaning that they become more pessimistic or less confident about their academic ability. And the second mechanism that I focus on is their interaction with the peers in the study group. And I find that minority women interact significantly less with their study group peers, meaning that they have a lower degree of integration to their immediate social environment. For the sake of time, I'll just briefly mention the two key contributions of this paper to the large literature studying women in male-dominated fields. So first, this paper shows that minority status can indeed cause women to leave male-dominated settings, and this potentially creates a vicious cycle of women's underrepresentation. Second, the findings of the paper suggest that small subgroups with non-minority women can potentially serve as a light touch policy tool to help keep more women in male-dominated fields. I will skip the details of the literature and also this. Now let's just jump to the experimental design. So here is a brief timeline of the experiment. The course that I study takes place in the 4th semester, roughly from mid-September to mid-December. So what I do is first in the beginning of the semester, before the course starts, I conduct a baseline survey, and then I invite students to register for the study groups. And among those who have voluntarily signed up, I randomly assign them into small study groups. And then there's the period of lectures, tutorials, and potential group activities. Then in the end, before the final exam, I conduct the end-line survey. Here, importantly, the survey elicits two things, essentially the two mechanisms that I focus on. First is their educational expectations, which I'll elaborate more in a second, and then the peer-to-peer interaction within the study group. So how does the group assignment looks like? It's very straightforward. As I said, I first have a pool of students who have signed up for the study groups. Then I just randomly assign them into different study groups of size 4. And as a result of the assignment, students may or may not be assigned as the minority gender in their study group. For example, this woman A in the female minority group and this man B in the male minority group, they experience the minority status. But other women and other men, they do not experience the minority status. This is, so for the identification, I basically compare this woman A to other women to study the impact of minority status on the women, and then similarly compare this man B to other men, okay? Roughly, I have about 620 students in total in the experiment, and about 40% of them are female. Okay, quickly about measurement. So as you can already see, I have 3 main outcome variables. The first is the voluntary course dropout behavior. It's a dummy variable, and by definition, if a student does not show up or attend the final exam at the course, then he or she drops out. So importantly, the course is compulsory for students' major or minor programs. So this dropout behavior is a high stakes decision in a sense. And then the second outcome, or the first mechanism, is educational expectations. And as I mentioned in the survey, I measure 3 aspects of expectation. Their grade for the course, the probability of passing the first year successfully at college, and also the highest academic degree that they expect to obtain. So for the analysis, I create a single index, a standardized index, capturing the 3 aspects of expectation. And then secondly is the third outcome is about peer-to-peer interaction. So this is only available in the second round of the experiment, and I capture 2 dimensions of interaction, including the academic interactions, like they study together for the course or solve problem sets together. And the second dimension is social interaction. To be very clear, how do I construct this index? So as you can see from the graph, like in the group, there are 4 students. So each one reports the frequency of academic or social interaction with each of the peers. And then I aggregate up these pairwise observations to construct an individual level index for the peer-to-peer interaction. Okay, I hope it's clear. Then the empirical strategy is very simple, right? So I basically regress the individual level outcomes on an indicator for the minority status in the group, then control for some individual characteristics which are measured at the baseline survey. So I have 3 outcomes, as you already see. Then I control for some individual characteristics, including their major, whether they retake the course and the experiment year fixed effects, as well as some information about their high school background, like the math grades, the language grades, and so on. And I also control for the big 5 personality traits. Then for the inference, I'll show you both the randomization inference p-values as well as the standard errors clustered at the group level. Okay, now let's look at the results. First, for the primary outcome, dropout, here I plot the overall pattern of the dropout rate by students' own gender and the group gender composition. On the y-axis, the dropout rate after, it's the dropout rate after taking out the fixed effects of the randomization strata in order to increase the precision. So first, for women, we can clearly see that those assigned to female minority groups, essentially the groups where women are the minority gender. And yeah, so we see that those in these groups have a much higher dropout rate than women in other groups. And this difference is significant at the 10% level. But for men, we don't see a significant difference across the gender compositions. Okay. So we can then look at the regression results. First, for women and using OLS regressions, you see that overall minority status increases women's dropout rate by about 10 percentage points. And this effect is robust to the inclusion of basic controls and high school controls, as well as their personality traits. Then we can also use probability regressions since it's a binary outcome, but the results overall are very similar and of a similar magnitude. By contrast, I do not find any significant effect of the minority status on men's dropout behavior. Okay, having shown you the main results of the paper, now I dig into to understand why women are more likely to drop out if they are assigned as the minority gender. And the first mechanism is, as I said, the educational expectations. So here again, I show you the overall pattern of the end line educational expectations using this combined index. And again, for women, you see a clear gap between the minority women and non-minority women. So those in female minority groups have a much lower expectation than other women. But for men, again, we do not see clear differences across gender compositions. And this pattern is again confirmed by the regression results. Here the dependent variable is this overall indicator for educational expectation at end line. And from column 1 to column 4, I first only have the basic controls, and then I control for the baseline expectation using the same measurements. Then I control for high school controls and personality traits. So overall, we see that the women experiencing minority status have a much lower expectation, and the effect size is about 0.4 standard deviations, which is a huge effect. But again, for men, we do not find any significant effect. Of course, you might wonder, like, how about the different aspects or dimensions of expectations? So here I just show you this outcome variables, like the different expectations that I measured by gender. So consistently, you see that women experiencing minority status expect a lower grade. They think they are less likely to pass the first year. They also expect a lower academic degree, especially they're less likely to expect a PhD degree, okay? But for men, overall, I do not find any effect. Okay, so that's the first mechanism. Now we can look at a second mechanism, how they interact among themselves in the group. Again, like the overall pattern. And I use this overall index for the interaction with peers. You see, again, like women in the female minority groups, they report a much lower intensity of interaction with peers than other women assigned to other groups. But for men, it's not very clear. Here, well, one observation now related to the paper is that the gender balance groups seem to induce the most frequent interactions among students. Yeah, I think it's very interesting. Now just look at the results again. So here in column 1 and column 2, I first look at academic interaction, then social interaction, then the overall interaction, combining both the academic interaction and social interaction. Okay, so consistently we see that women assigned as the minority gender, they report a much lower intensity of interaction, no matter which dimension we look at. But for men, it's not very clear. So here, I'm not sure if you have enough time, but just briefly say, like, here I want to understand why women are excluded from the male-dominated group. And I especially want to know whether it's driven by women's preference or the men's preference, you know, whether it's because women, they want to interact only with women, or because men, they only want to interact with men. So what I do here is to look at this pairwise interaction and also the evaluation between students to see how it depends on the gender of the peer. So first, we see clearly that men has a strong preference for same gender peers, or a much lower preference for opposite gender peers. So they interact significantly less with female peers, and they also report a much lower willingness to pay for female peers. But for women, their interaction with peers as well as their evaluation of peers doesn't seem to depend on the gender of the peer. So suggesting that this exclusion of women is mainly driven by the man's preference, okay? And then simply to understand whether these two intermediate outcomes really mediate the effect of minority status on the dropout behavior. So a simple test of it is to look at correlations, right, between the primary outcome and the intermediate outcomes. And indeed, I find that students with lower educational expectation or lower intensity of interaction with peers are more likely to drop out from the course. And then I also use this more sophisticated Heckman approach to do the mediation analysis, but I'll skip it today. So before concluding, I want to show you two important results. First is that I want to understand whether this minority status effect is only about the gender of the peer, or could it be confounded by other peer characteristics. For example, you might imagine like a male-dominated group may display, you know, other features like a higher intensity of competitiveness or gender bias and so on, which could potentially also affect women's dropout behavior. So to test for that, yeah, okay, good. So to test for that, very simply, when I regress the females dropout on minority status, I also control for some peer characteristics like their high school background, their preferences and personalities. But overall, you see this effect of the minority status stays strong and statistically significant, suggesting that it's really a problem about the unbalanced gender. And then secondly, I want to know like which woman do we lose if we expose them to the minority status? Is it a high ability woman or the low ability woman, right? I think that's essential for the policymakers to know. So strikingly, I find that it's mainly the high ability women who have above median math grades that are affected by the minority status. They are much more likely to drop out. They have much lower expectation and also interact much less with their peers. Okay, just to conclude, so this paper shows that women's minority status can indeed drive them out of male-dominated fields. And why is that? Potentially it's because women in the minority have a lower academic self-efficacy or self-confidence, and they find it more difficult to get integrated to a male-dominated social environment. And the potential policy implication is simply, you know, like for STEM or economics programs, we should try to avoid creating female minority groups, but instead introduce other types of gender mixed groups. Okay, so that's all I have. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much.
Doesn't seem to depend on